Hey, what's good, everybody? I'd like to welcome you all back to the Boombox Guru channel. I'm your host, LB. So, today's video, I'm really excited about doing today's video. To be honest with you, it's long overdue. As you can see by the title, I'm actually going to be doing a discography review of one of my favorite metal bands. They're my favorite band out of the big four, and that's Anthrax. I know that's kind of the unpopular opinion for anybody to say that Anthrax is their favorite band out of the big four, but I'm not ashamed to say it. I'm not really concerned about the naysayers. I like what I like. Music is subjective, so I'm just gonna be truthful, and I'm just gonna state it. They are my favorite out of the big four. For this video, I'm not gonna go through their whole entire discography. I'm gonna just keep it with what I consider to be the band's classic era, which is from 1984 all the way to 1990. Basically, the Belladonna years, the first Belladonna years, which that was the most commercially successful period for Anthrax. Not only that, but it was such a great time for thrash metal as well, because that was the era. The 1980s was the era where thrash metal came to prominence and it reigned supreme. And along with Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer, say what you want to about Anthrax, but they were one of the best-selling thrash metal bands of the 1980s. They sold a lot of records. They have, and still have a huge fan base to this day. And they were one of those early bands that were responsible for bringing thrash metal from the underground to a wider audience. So without further ado, we're just going to go ahead and get into this video. And of course, we're going to start with where it all began, with the band's first album, Fistful of Metal, released in 1984 on Megaforce Records. So Fistful of Metal, this is the only album that features Neil Turbin on vocals and Dan Lilker on bass. Scott Ian, who is the rhythm guitarist and only original member of the Anthrax, left. Him and Danny Lilker are the ones who started the band back in 1981. But Fistful of Metal, solid debut album. I actually enjoyed this record. It's not my favorite Anthrax album, but it's got a lot of great songs on here. And a fun fact about this album is that this was actually the first album from a band from a band of the Big Four that was actually called thrash metal. I think there was a writer for Kerrang! Magazine. He actually called this album thrash metal when he was referring to one of the album's tracks called Metal Thrashing Mad. So Fistful of Metal was the first album out of the Big Four albums that got called thrash metal. And even though it's considered thrash metal, especially by today's standards, if you really listen to this record, it's actually more in line with British heavy metal and speed metal. Because at this point, man, Anthrax hadn't really quite found their sound. They hadn't really quite found their sound just yet, and they were basically wearing their influences on their sleeve. I mean, this album is really steeped in Judas Priest and Iron Maiden worship, which was something that most of the Big Four bands did on their debut. I mean, if you listen to Slayer's first album, there's a lot of Iron Maiden and Judas Priest influences. I would say Metallica's Kill 'Em All and Megadeth's Killing Is My Business are probably the only two records that really, as far as debuts from the Big Four, that really had that thrash metal sound. But Slayer's Show No Mercy was even more thrashier than Fistful of Metal, in my opinion. But I like this record. There's a lot of great tracks on here that I enjoy. Death Rider, of course, Metal Thrashing Mad. Let's see here, Soldiers of Metal, which was one of the band's, I think, first singles. Death from Above, the instrumental Across the River. Howlin' Furies is an awesome track. The only song on here that I'm really not that crazy about is the cover of I'm 18 by Alice Cooper. Anthrax is a band that will later on, they would really be known for their cover songs, because they do a real good job at covering songs. But I don't know, I wasn't too crazy about this particular cover. And I believe it's the only song in Anthrax's history that Scott Ian didn't play guitar on, because he was actually against them doing this cover song. The band in general was against it. This was something that their record label Megaforce actually forced them to do. But in any regards, man, like I said, this may not be my favorite Anthrax album, but I think that it was a solid debut. And of course, after this album, Neil Turbin and Danny Lilker would both be dismissed from the band, and so greater things will come. But don't overlook this album. I still think that this is an album that is definitely worth checking out. It's got some great tunes on it. It may not have that Anthrax sound that they would later be known for, but there's a lot of great songwriting on here. And oh yeah, before I continue, man, Neil Turbin, I remember, I think it was either an interview that I read or I listened to, but he actually only had 1 day to record all his vocals. Yeah, he only had 1 day to record his vocals. And, considering that he only had that short amount of time, I think he did an amazing job as a vocalist. I mean, of course, him being the professional singer, he has his critiques about his performance on here because he didn't have enough time to really do what he wanted to do or take it to the levels he wanted to. But I think he did a phenomenal job, seeing as he was so pressed for time. But yeah, just a solid debut album, but better things will come the next year, the following year. All right, so moving right along, we're getting to the band's second album, man. You know what? I'm gonna try my best not to talk too long about this next album, man, because I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. This is my favorite Anthrax album. Out of all their records, man, this one is my favorite. So, Spreading the Disease, man. Spreading the Disease. Man, one of the illest album covers in metal right there. This is one of my favorite heavy metal album covers, man. Right up there with Motorhead's Overkill album cover. I actually have a t-shirt of this album cover. Well, not the exact album cover, but it's like a reissue of the t-shirts they put out during the tour of this album. But I got the standard disc version, and I also have, this is the 30th anniversary reissue. Comes with a bonus disc. Actually, I think it comes with 2 bonus discs. No, it's just 1 bonus disc. The original album, which is remastered by Charlie Benante, the band's drummer, and then the second disc is like a live performance. But if you can get your hands on this reissue, man, definitely get it, because it has a far better sound than the standard disc edition. But man, Spreading the Disease, I could do a whole video about this, and I might do that. So I'm gonna try to hold back and not give too much information about Spreading the Disease. But personally, for me, this album was the real debut of Anthrax. It was the first studio album with the classic lineup. So Joey Belladonna, he's brought in on vocals, and Frank Bello, who is also the nephew of drummer Charlie Benante, he's brought in on bass. To me, Spreading the Disease, this is where Anthrax really started to sound like Anthrax. This is where their sound really came to fruition. Now, even though this record falls more in thrash metal, there's still some hints of the British heavy metal influences from Fistful of Metal. And that's because there are a few songs on this album that were written while Neil Turbin was still in the band. Yeah, because Neil Turbin didn't get kicked out of the band until probably around early 85. So there was a few songs on this album that were written with him while he was still a member of Anthrax. And of course, after his dismissal, they got in Joey and Frank, they did the Armed and Dangerous EP, which had them re-record a lot of songs that they did on Fistful of Metal with that lineup, as well as do some cover tracks. But this is a phenomenal thrash metal album. I would consider this to be one of the most perfect thrash metal albums ever to be released, because every song on here is great from start to finish. So much consistency. I mean, everything from the songwriting to the sequencing of the track listing, everything just flows so well together, man. This is just an amazing record. It's one of those albums where I hate for it to end. Like, a lot of times when I listen to Spreading the Disease, I actually get a little disappointed when it gets to the last song. I kind of wish they would have put like 2 more songs at the end and before they ended the album, man. But this is just such a great record. I mean, you can say whatever you want to about Anthrax, because I know a lot of naysayers out there had their negative opinions about the band, but you cannot tell me that Spreading the Disease is not one of the greatest thrash metal albums ever released. I mean, when they cemented that classic lineup, man, they kicked the doors wide open with this record. I mean, look at some of the tracks on here, like AIR, Lone Justice, Madhouse, which is one of the band's first most popular tracks. Aftershock, Gung Ho, the last song on this album, Gung Ho, just a full-on thrash metal anthem right there, man. Aftershock, The Enemy. I mean, it's just so many great tracks on this album, man, that I would be hard-pressed for anybody, even if you don't really like Anthrax that much, I would be hard-pressed to find anybody that doesn't enjoy this record. And I've heard a lot of people say that I know personally say that this was the first thrash metal album that they heard, was Spreading the Disease. So Anthrax has a distinction of being a gateway band for a lot of people who got into thrash metal. But this is just such a great record. It's not only one of my favorite thrash metal albums, it's one of my favorite albums of all time, period, across music genres, man. That's just how good this record is. So for anybody that's not that familiar with Anthrax, that may be looking for a gateway to get into the band, I highly recommend Spreading Disease as the album to go with, man, because it is just such a phenomenal record. You know, from start to finish, man, you will not be disappointed, man. So anybody that's a thrash metal fan, I think whether you like Anthrax or not, you should definitely at least have this record in your collection, man. That's just how great this record is, man. But I'm gonna keep it right there, man, because I could go on and on about Spreading the Disease, and I'm kind of planning on doing like a solo album review on Spreading the Disease, so I'm not gonna go too in depth about it, but just know that this is one of the greatest thrash metal albums of all time. So if you've never listened to this record, you definitely need to go check it out. All right, so moving right along, 1987, and 1987, man, this was an even bigger year for Anthrax, man, because this next album is what really took them to the next level and really catapulted them as being one of the biggest thrash metal bands of all time and being one of the greatest thrash metal bands of all time. So that is Among the Living, released in 1987. Standard disc, deluxe edition. Deluxe edition has a remastered sound. Got the back cover right here, the deluxe edition and stuff right there. But man, Among the Living, what another phenomenal record. Now, amongst the Anthrax fan base, there's a bit of a divide, because you have people that are more Spreading the Disease fans, and then you have some that are Among the Living. Clearly, I fall amongst Spreading the Disease, without a doubt. But I cannot deny the impact that Among the Living had, not only on Anthrax's career, but on thrash metal in general. Even though this record came out in 1987, it's usually lumped in with, Master of Puppets, Peace Cells, and Rain in Blood. Although those records came out in 86, still Among the Living it's lumped in with those records because, it was a pivotal album. It was a pivotal album. Just like those records were very pivotal to thrash metal, so was this record. So along with those records, it helped to bring thrash metal to a wider audience. Because by this time, Anthrax, they were still on Megaforce, but they had also signed a deal with Island Records, which was a major label. I mean, I think by 86, all four of the big four bands were signed to major labels, I believe. I could be wrong about that, but I know that they were at least putting out records that were hugely successful and that really just catapulted thrash metal and catapulted these bands to legendary status. And it's amazing how these bands were still relatively new and they were managing to become legends within that short amount of time. And Among the Living is a great record. By this point, you could say that Among the Living was Anthrax going fully thrash metal. Much of the British heavy metal, speed metal influences from Spreading the Disease as well as Fistful of Metal, by this point it was non-existent. It was fully thrash metal. As a matter of fact, the band was taking more influences from the hardcore punk scene. Anthrax is a band from New York City. They were one of the first East Coast thrash metal bands. So being from New York City, these guys were fans of that New York hardcore scene. Scott Ian, in his book, he talked about how he would go to shows and see the Cro-Mags and Agnostic Front and Sick of It All. He was a fan of that stuff. Not only that, but after the band recorded Spreading the Disease, they still had studio time left. So what Scott Ian, Charlie Benante did, they hooked up with original bassist Dan Lilker and vocalist Billy Milano, and they formed a side project called Stormtroopers of Death. And they released a landmark, groundbreaking crossover thrash album called Speak English or Die. It was one of the earliest crossover thrash albums that was a huge influence on further developing that subgenre. And I think a lot of the influences from that record came onto Among the Living, because there's definitely a huge punk aesthetic in a lot of the songs on here. Joey Belladonna's vocals are also a lot more aggressive. Also has a, sort of like a punkish style to it, man. But this is just a phenomenal record. I mean, the first half of the album, the first side, which would be tracks 1 through 5 on the vinyl, that's practically like a greatest hits album right there, man. You got the title track, Among the Living, Caught in a Mosh, I Am the Law, NFL, A Skeleton in the Closet. All of these songs have become staples of Anthrax's live performances. You know, when I got to see them live several years ago when they opened up for Slayer on their farewell tour, they played pretty much a good bit of these songs. I think they opened up with Caught in a Mosh, if I'm not mistaken. But that whole first side, it's just greatest hits, man. That's my favorite side. I think side 1 is the best on the record. Side 2 starts with Indians, which has become arguably one of Anthrax's best known songs. I'll be honest with you, I'm really not that crazy about side 2, because I feel like after Indians, you know, it kind of falters slightly a bit, not that much. You know, One World and Horror of It All, those are great songs, but they don't really do that much for me. But they more than make up for that once they get to the last track, which is Imitation of Life, which I think that's actually one of my favorite Anthrax songs. I mean, they more than made up for side 2 with that track. I mean, that was a great ending to the album. I mean, at this point, Anthrax were kind of known to end their albums with like the most fastest and most thrashiest numbers, and that's what they did with this record. I really enjoyed that album. But Among the Living, you know, even though I'm more of a Spreading the Disease guy, I can't lie, the impact that Among the Living has had on thrash metal. You know, I don't think thrash metal would be what it is today if it hadn't been for this record, as well as the other ones released by the Big Four. So this record holds its place. It was the band's breakthrough album. It catapulted them from being like playing in small clubs to graduating to mid-sized venues and eventually arenas and stadiums. You know, this album's success, it brought Anthrax to a wider audience, and it also made a lot of other bigger bands pay more attention to them, because I believe it was during this album when they ended up going on tour with Kiss. They opened up for tour, I think, for Kiss on the Crazy in the Nights tour. I believe it was during this album. So come on, Kiss. And Kiss is a band that influenced these guys, and Kiss asks you to open up for them. Come on. So this record really did its thing, man. Whichever one is your favorite, man, it's no denying what this album has done. And you know, again, like I said about Spreading the Disease, you may not like Anthrax that much, but you can't deny the greatness that Among the Living is. And I've also heard a lot of people say that this was actually the first thrash metal album that they heard. So again, Anthrax has the distinction of having 2 albums in their discography that was a gateway for people to discover thrash metal. So that says a lot about their talent and how great of a band they are. All right, so moving right along, we're at 1988 now. So this next album, you know, I would honestly say that even though I enjoy this next album, even though I enjoy it, I will agree that it's probably the weakest out of the bunch within this video. I would say it's the weakest, but it still has a lot of enjoyable songs on here. And that's State of Euphoria, released in 1988. So I got the standard disc version, and here's the 30th anniversary edition, also remastered by Charlie Benante. I don't know if Charlie did the remaster on the deluxe edition of Among the Living. I don't know about that, but I know he's done these 30th anniversary reissues. So yeah, State of Euphoria. This record, how can I put it, man? This record doesn't suffer for having bad songs. That's not why this record doesn't really hold up to the same level as Spreading the Disease or Among the Living. I think what this record really suffered from was the fact that it was rushed. I'm trying to remember. I guess I should have looked this up before I started the video, but it was either Judas Priest or Iron Maiden. One of those 2 bands asked Anthrax to open up for them on tour, to go on tour with them and open up. And Anthrax jumped at the chance. They accepted the offer, and therefore this record ended up being rushed. Because back in those days, in order for you to tour, you had to have a new album out. So that's what happened. And you can listen to a lot of the songs and you can tell that if more time had been spent, that the songs probably would have been a whole lot better. But there's still some enjoyable moments on here. I mean, you listen to the songs and they're great, but there's moments where they don't quite hit the mark. But they're not bad songs either, because there's a lot of great tracks on here. I mean, Be All End All, Out of Sight, Out of Mind, Making Me Laugh, Antisocial, Who Cares Wins, Now It's Dark, Schism, Misery Loves Company. I mean, I think every song on here was good. It's just that because they rushed the album out to go on tour, they didn't get the proper TLC that they should have got in order for them to be even greater. And Scott Ian has actually even admitted that in his book, that in hindsight they should have just passed on the tour and spent more time recording the album. But at the same time, when you got one of the biggest heavy metal bands of all time looking at you and telling you, hey, we want you guys to go on tour with us and open up, you can't pass up that opportunity. You can't pass it up at all. So I don't blame them for taking the chance and going on that tour with either Judas Priest or Iron Maiden. Anybody that knows which band it was, leave that in the comments for me, because I should have looked it up before I did this video. But I really dig this record. Like I said, most of the songs on here I really enjoy. I mean, Antisocial was released as a single, and that's actually a cover song. I believe the original band that did that song was a French rock band called Trust. I've heard the original version. The original version is good, man, but honestly, man, I prefer Anthrax's version. And, you know, to me, Anthrax is a band that when they do a cover song, they have this way of they have this balance of kind of like, they stick true to the original version, but they know how to just kind of add enough into it to make it their own track. And that's what they did with Antisocial, man. I mean, for a long time, I didn't even know Antisocial was a cover song. I thought that was an Anthrax song. I mean, it was probably only in the last several years that I found out that it was another band that actually did that. But that was a great song. It was a popular track. Also, I think a lot of what contributed to this band's, I guess, lack of success. I mean, I think the album, when it came out, it still charted pretty high, but it's just that, you know, fans and critics recognized it sort of being inferior to Among the Living. But I think a lot of it was a part of that was that Anthrax had kind of received a little bit of backlash around this time. I think people were kind of growing tired of their like cartoonish image. And I remember in Scott Ian's book, he was talking about how he saw the video, I think it was for Antisocial, on MTV, and he saw like Dan Spitz was on there wearing like Tweety Bird jam shorts and stuff like that, and he just felt embarrassed by it. He was like, this has got to change. So this was like the beginning of the band trying to change and go into after this album, it was the beginning of them changing and going into a serious direction. But with that being said, you know, I still enjoy State of Euphoria. Show you guys the back cover right there. A really cool back cover right there of the band. An illustration. That's the Knot Man, another one of their mascots. Well, basically, it is their mascot. But although I really enjoy this album, I would not recommend any new fans to Anthrax to start with this album. I wouldn't recommend it. I definitely would recommend starting with like Spreading the Disease or Among the Living. Heck, even Fistful of Metal before you get to this one. But it's still a great record in spite of it not being as good as the prior 3 or 2. It's still got some pretty good joints on there. So definitely don't overlook this one. And now we're getting to, I would say officially the last one within this particular area, the last studio album of this era. And that is Persistence of Time, released in 1990, standard CD edition, 30th anniversary edition. Yeah, man. Persistence of Time, man. I'm gonna tell you, this album right here is really starting to become one of my favorites. You know, when I was going back and listening to these albums to get myself refamiliarized with this for the video, I found myself listening to Persistence of Time a lot. Now, I've read reviews online where a lot of people kind of seem to look down on this record. They don't like it as much. But I think it's one of their best records. I think that it was definitely a big improvement over State of Euphoria. So when Anthrax started recording Persistence of Time, the band was actually going through a weird period, man. One of the biggest things that happened was their rehearsal space. During the recording of this album, their rehearsal space caught on fire, and they ended up losing a lot of their equipment and stuff in the fire. and the stuff that they didn't lose actually got stolen by people from that neighborhood. So Anthrax wasn't allowed to go inside that place because it was a safety hazard. The fire department wouldn't allow anybody to go in there, but people, I guess the place was like in the hood or something. People went in there and stole equipment, and what could be salvaged, the people like had it refurbished. And Frank Bello said in an interview several years ago on Loudwire that he's seen a lot of that equipment on eBay for sale. People went and got it refurbished and they're selling it online. But the band members ended up going in there anyway, disobeying those orders and getting what they could of the equipment that hadn't been stolen. So not only that, but Scott Ian, he was also going through some personal issues around that time. He was going through a divorce. So a lot of that affected the songwriting and the lyrics. So Persistence of Time, compared to the previous albums, this is a darker record. It's a darker record because it's really conveying all the trouble and the hardships that the band was going through at this time. And the subject matter is more serious. Not only that, because like I said, after State of Euphoria, the band, particularly Scott Ian, decided that it was time for the band to change their image, to be taken more serious. So they shed the whole cartoonish looks, like those like jam shorts, those short pants they were known for, and everything like that. They got rid of all of that. They're wearing like ripped jeans and black t-shirts and stuff like that. Scott Ian ended up cutting his hair off, which, not to make fun of him, but I don't think he had much of a choice at that point. So he starts wearing he started wearing the baseball cap, which now that I think about it, I think he was trying to go for that. What's my man from the band from Cheap Trick? What's his name? Rick Nielsen, the guitar player. I kind of think Scott Ian was kind of trying to go for that kind of look around this period, because he was wearing that ball cap a lot, which is cool. I mean, hey, sometimes you just gotta let it go, man. But with that, the image changed and everything like that, and the subject matter changed. The subject matter on here was a lot more serious. The biggest topic on this album is about racism and peace and unity and stuff of that nature. So, and also the songwriting took a different turn, because the songs on here are a little bit more technical and progressive, and there's a lot of songs on here that are a bit longer in length. And it was the beginning of a new era. It was the end of an old era and the beginning of a new one. Unfortunately, though, this was the last album with Joey Belladonna on vocals for years, up until 2011, when he came back on the Worship Music album. He got fired from the band in '92 because they felt like that he wasn't really conveying, that he didn't really fit in with the new direction that they were trying to go as a vocalist. But to be quite honest with you, I really think that what happened was the band was going through a weird time, and with everything that was happening, I think they just kind of took it out on Joey. I think the band just took all their frustration out on Joey. So I think he got the short end of the stick. Dan Spitz was actually the only one who was not in agreement with Joey being fired from the band, because him and Joey, I believe, were the closest in the band. He was the one that was not in agreement. So that Joey being dismissed from the band is what effectively resulted in Dan Spitz later leaving the band after the Sound the White Noise album, which was the first one they did with vocalist John Bush, who was at the time the former vocalist of Armored Saint. But in any regards, man, people have their negative critiques about Persistence of Time, but I think it's a great record, and it's easily starting to become one of my favorites within this era, man. I like it. I like the more serious direction that they took. I like the longer song structures. I like the more aggressiveness of it. I like it. I mean, yeah, it's a darker album, but I don't mind it. I think it's cool. It's still, even though it's darker, it still has that Anthrax energy in it, man. Oh, and I gotta talk about the song "Got the Time." Got the Time. Again, I can't remember it's a cover song. Got the Time is a cover song, so I can't quite remember. I don't know what band they covered that from. Again, if you're watching this video, name the band that they covered this song from in the comments. But they nailed that cover. I mean, that's one of my favorite cover songs from Anthrax, man. They nailed it. I think they did that song live when I saw them on the Slayer tour. I think they did. I know they did Antisocial. I can't quite remember, but whatever the case, man, they nailed that cover. And like the album's called Persistence of Time, so there's a whole concept theme running through the album about time and stuff. So you got the title, you got the first song called Time, and then you got the time and stuff like that. So there's a bit of a concept that's running around, man. But still, I think this is a great record. I wouldn't recommend starting with it. I personally wouldn't recommend starting with it. Definitely, I think it's best with this whole particular era. I think it's best to just start from the beginning and work your way forward. But still a great record nonetheless. All right, so I got an honorable mention that I want to show you guys right quick. Now, this isn't a studio album, but this is more of a compilation record. Well, it is a compilation album. This is Attack of the Killer Bees, released in 1991. Yeah, this is a compilation album that compiles a bunch of miscellaneous songs like B-sides, odds and ends, tracks that the band, like, it's got some live tracks on here, like, there's a live version of Belly of the Beast. There's a NFB. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce that. That's like, dang, I don't even know what NFB means. I'm sorry, y'all. Oh, there's a live version of Keeping in the Family. My main reason for buying this was because it has Bring the Noise. That the version that they did with Public Enemy, the rap metal version, it's on there. And they also have a I'm the Man 91, which is an updated version of that classic track they did in 87, which I'm the Man, the original one, that was one of the earliest rap metal songs. But that first version was more of like a novelty track. And you know what? So a little bit of trivia. I watched an interview with Frank Bello recently, and he said that originally when they did the original version of I'm the Man, they was actually planning on doing that with the Beastie Boys. Yeah, the Beastie, because they were real good friends with the Beastie Boys and stuff, and they were supposed to come in and like do that song with them. I guess they were going to do the vocal parts, but I think their schedules or something got mixed up, or the schedules didn't line up and the Beastie Boys couldn't do it. So that's how Charlie, Scott, and Frank ended up doing the vocal parts of that song. But yeah, there's an updated version of I'm the Man 91. Starting Up a Posse's on here. Starting Up a Posse, I think that's the song. I think Scott Ian sings on that. He does lead vocals on that song. It's kind of a novelty track. I think it was, this was back when the PMRC was at its height. So I think this was a song like kind of critiquing the PMRC and their whole thing about censorship. Let's see, Sex is on here, which that's a song that I think that's on the deluxe edition of Among the Living now. But yeah, it's I just thought I would mention this. It's a compilation album. I don't listen to it that much, but this was like the last official release that they did with Joey Belladonna before they dismissed him for the band. But I just thought I would, since I have it in my collection, I thought that I would mention it since it sort of falls in line with this particular era. But it's you can take it or leave it, man. I just bought it because it had Bring the Noise and that I'm the Man 91 on it. But it's not really that important of a release, at least nowadays, unless you just want to collect it, because a lot of these songs I think are now appearing on like these reissues and deluxe editions. But yeah, that's it for this video. That's my discography review of Anthrax from 1984 to 1990, or /91 if you want to include Attack of the Killer Bees. But I really have had a lot of fun talking about this, man. I just noticed I don't have a lot of videos about Anthrax on my channel, except for one where I discuss why I think they deserve to be in the Big Four. But I wanted to do this review, man, because Anthrax, they are my favorite out of the Big Four. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I think they're a great band. I had the pleasure of seeing them live so far once, and I got to tell you, that performance was one of the best at that show. I think Lamb of God and Anthrax's performances were the best out of the opening acts. Lamb of God, not Lamb of God, but Anthrax, man, when they came out there, they got a huge reception from everybody. Everybody that was at that show, well, I don't know about everybody, but I'll say a good majority of the people, they were excited to see Anthrax. So this whole thing that's going on the internet where people were trying to like bash Anthrax and where it's like the cool thing not to like them, you know, that's just people's own personal opinions. There's nothing wrong with liking this band. You know, yeah, they weren't as dangerous looking or as threatening as the other three bands, but that's what I liked about them. I liked the fact that you could look at them, more particularly back during this era, you could look at them and these were like guys that you could like have a good time with. They just look like guys that you could just go and party with and chill out and have a really great time with. That's what really drew me more to Anthrax than the other big four bands. So that's why I continue to like them today. In spite of what you may think about their more recent, later material, or how people may feel about Scott Ian. Also, speaking of Scott Ian, I have this book right here. This is Scott Ian's memoir called I'm the Man. The story of that guy from Anthrax. This came out in 2014. It was co-written with John Wiederhorn. I might have butchered his last name. And there's a foreword by Kirk Hammett of Metallica. This is a really good book. Really good book. Scott tells, you know how memoirs go. He talks about his early upbringing and things of that nature. But there's a lot of good stories in him about the early days of forming Anthrax. What the band did like after they had their success. There's a lot of interesting stories in here and things of that nature, man. So if you've never read this book, definitely go check it out. A lot of the information that I knew in this video came from this book. Some of it was stuff I looked up on other places, but a lot of it came from this book as well. And I also plan on getting Frankie's book. Frankie has a book that he came out with, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, that I'm planning on purchasing here real soon and reading that as well. But hope you all enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making this video and talking about one of my favorite metal bands of all time. So hope you guys really enjoyed this. If you did enjoy it, hit that thumbs up and give me a like because it helps with the channel. Also, be sure to share this video as well as hit that subscribe button and tap that bell so you'll be notified when I drop new content. I want to give a huge shout out to everybody that's been subscribing to the channel, everybody that's been commenting on the videos, who's been just watching my videos. I truly appreciate it. And as always, hope everybody has a blessed day, a blessed week, and love, peace, and music. Peace out, y'all.